afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the seminar today. We'll hear today from Reverend Dr. Hathaway, who has been a great friend of Morgan Cares and very prolific in everything he does. He's been a pastor, he has a PhD in philosophy, Doctor of Ministry degree, and he's very interested in research as well. So he'll give us some of his background today, and he'll speak to us even more when we have a conference. He'll be one of the keynote speakers, so we're very pleased with that. He's been a strong advocate, and we have a grant we wrote together that probably will be funded, so we'll be working together there as well.
Yeah, that's good news.
Yeah, so we appreciate you coming today. Everybody got a copy of your bio, so they saw it. So we look forward to having a conversation with you today.
Well, Dr. Valerie, I am so honored to be here, so excited. So many of my colleagues that are on this call are also my friends. I have to thank Sister Pinchback for just helping coordinate my schedule with everything. I want to like to give a shout out to a dear colleague and friend, Sister Janet Hopkins, who's I understand is on this Zoom call as well. I like to share some thoughts and ideas on community participatory research that understands the value of resiliency in community residents. Kind of a unique approach, but it's been something that I've found as a way of engagement that respects everyone in the process. The Detroit Urban Research Center uses this definition of community-based participatory research. Quote, a partnership approach to research that equitably involves community members, organizational representatives, and academic researchers in all aspects of the research process, end of quote. I adopt this definition because it emphasizes the idea of equality. Justice Thurgood Marshall was once asked, what does it mean to be equal? He responded, equal means getting the same things at the same time in the same place. This is important because in the research field, there is an over-reliance on professional credentials, public research papers, and on being subject matter experts recognized by your peers. One of the things that we noticed is a recent article that came out that just talks about how there's just a small field of researchers that are able to garner the large bulk of NIH research grants, because it's almost like a self-fulfilling ecosystem. And so I think it's important for us in the research field to recognize that research institutions and principal investigators do command a large percentage of the research grants. And in many instances, the community-based participants are relegated to what I call gift cards and free meals. This is because during the budgeting process for the grant, the community is not at the table as equal stakeholders. In far too many instances, they are check the box requirement. To have true and effective community participatory research, every institution, every investigator must understand what I call the 4 R's of community engagement. The 4 R's of community engagement are recognition, respect, relationship, and resiliency. I identified these elements in an article I co-authored many years ago entitled Children's Mental Health, Partnering with the Faith Community. It was in a book published in 2002 entitled Providing Mental Health Services to Youth Where They Are. I argue members of the community bring to the table value add in community participatory research because they are trusted sources and they have lived experience. I've spent much of my career in the field of faith-based community organizing. I received my training through the Industrial Areas Foundation, formerly the Saul Alinsky Institute. I had the fortunate opportunity to learn from and interact with some of the leaders in the field of faith-based organizing, the late Ed Chambers, Mike Geekin, Arne Graff. By coupling their consultation with my own experiences and skill, I developed a proficiency in faith-based and community organizing. In the late 70s, I was the assistant director of Baltimore's United in Leadership Development, BUILD. It is described as one of the most influential faith-based organizations here in Baltimore, as well as in the country. It has a more than 40 years history of indigenous and issue-oriented work. In the 80s, I was the executive director of a faith-based coalition in Southeast Washington. That organization has morphed into many different areas that the remnants still remain active in the Anacostia community. In the 90s, I organized the Coppin Heights CDC and assisted in the expansion of Coppin State University south of North Avenue. In most recent years, I've organized Act Now, Baltimore, faith-based organization with institutions in the councilmatic districts, the beloved Community Services Corporation, a community development organization whose highlight project is the work underway, which is a $14 million project to restore the elementary school attended by Justice Thurgood Marshall. It's also developing a relationship with the National Park Service. And I co-founded the African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative in partnership with the Lieber Institute for Brain Development and Morgan State University. I'll discuss that later and towards the end of my talk. I've engaged in thousands of individual meetings with community leaders and personalities over the years. I found the 4 R's of community engagement to be validated over those years. Recognition. It means you as the community member are seen, felt, and heard. That is recognition. It's very important that you are seen. You're not invisible. You are seen. You are felt. The essence of who you are is in the room. And you are heard. When you speak, your voice commands authority. The second is respect. Respect means that you as the community member is held in high regard and that your expertise is acknowledged. Relationship. Relationships mean that you as a community member add value to my life, to my career, and or to my endeavor, either as an individual or institution, having a mutually binding connection over a period of time. Resiliency. Resiliency means you as the community member have overcome situations and experiences that for some has been a barrier, but for you allows you to be fully engaged with other stakeholders. I would argue that if you probe the area of resiliency more deeply with a community member, you will find 3 things. 1, they have extended family networks. They are products of community-based learning, and they are involved with faith-based organizations. What are some of the barriers to community participatory research? One of the barriers that I've identified is clarity in goals. Persons come to the experience, they have immediate needs, they have concerns, they have problems. And what happens many times is they're not able to distinguish what I call the difference between a problem and an issue. An issue is what researchers seek to identify, which is the specific element, specific aspect that we can address to find a conclusion or solution. And many times what happens is a person comes to a meeting, they get in a session, and they think you're going to solve the world. We're going to change the totality of my circumstances. So it becomes very important that you clarify goals in the beginning of your engagement, or that will be a barrier. The other thing that I recognize inside of that could be a barrier is what I call understanding networks. There are basically 3 types of community leaders, and they are identified this way: a primary leader, a secondary leader, and a tertiary leader. A primary leader is one that has a large network of people. If you say, we're going to have a community meeting and we need to have 100 people at the meeting, that person has the kind of gravitas that 100 people will follow them and come to that meeting. A secondary leader be the one that says, hey, I bring my 20 people, and those 20 people will consistently come, they call them and they come to the meeting. A tertiary leader is that person that has themselves and maybe 1 or 2 others. And it becomes important that in the community engagement process, you identify as many primary leaders as possible so that you can have the community fully engaged in the process through their grapevine and through their network. The other area that I found is called, how do you convey respect and appreciation? And that takes me back to my 4 auras. It's important that every time everyone comes to a meeting that you convey that you are appreciated, that you are respected, that what you offer is valued. If not, that becomes a barrier. And then the other thing that I've identified, and this is the 4th element, is called learning the language. There's a difference between the language of the gown and the town. And in many instances, you almost need an interpreter that can able to interpret the academic lingo as well as the community lingo. So learning language is important so that you're able to communicate, that you're able to demystify technical words and technical language so that it's understood. But it's also important that the speech patterns and the word usage of community leaders is also understood, so that it's not misunderstood when one speaks. The other thing that is important that I found is what is called learning traditions and norms, customs. One time I had a group of researchers with me in West Baltimore, very highly professional people, very intelligent, very engaged, and very committed. They looked at a light pole, and on that light pole, there were balloons and teddy bears. There was wax candles and empty whiskey bottles and liquor bottles. And immediately they looked at that and said, wow, why don't we just remove that eyesore? And I immediately had to remind them that in this community, that was a memorial, that was sacred. And so understanding customs and norms is important, or it can become a barrier. Establishing a common mission. That means that you have to understand the self-interest of the community, the self-interest of the researchers, and you got to come to a mutually agreed upon approach and mission. The 7th area is developing a planning committee. And we all understand that, hey, we need to have people engaged, we need a planning committee, but it becomes important that you are fully inclusive in that initial planning meeting process. And one of the things that I've also found, and this is 8, is that you start small, that you manage small wins. Many times in the organizing process, we forget the importance and value of celebrating. The fact that we've come together and we've created a mission statement, we all agree upon it, celebrate it. The fact that we have objectives and goals that we're all going to work on together, celebrate it. The fact that we were able to bring out a large number of people and they are going to participate in the process, you celebrate it. It's important that you celebrate your wins as you move through the participatory engagement process. And then the other part is that, and this is 9, is that you provide training. And training is 2-way. It is the community leader as trainer. It is the researcher as trainer. It is the community leader as learner. It is the researcher as learner. And we have to provide for opportunities where there is kind of quid pro quo in training, so that in fact, the community person is seen as a subject matter expert and they can come to the table and present their data, their information, their understanding, and we can learn from them and we can learn more about the process as well. The 10th area that I find is that ensuring quality improvements. Here is a real question that a community person has every time they come to an engagement process. They are asking, if they don't say it out loud, they are asking, how does my participation improve the quality of life of my community? Fundamentally, they are moved by values and they want to improve the quality of life. And so it becomes important that in the process, you affirm for them that their contribution, that their learning, that this experience will in fact improve the quality of life of themselves as well as members of their community. And then the last area, which is 11, the last area that is important is that we got to provide feedback. All throughout the process, it's important that we have feedback, 1 from the community, 2 from the researchers, 3 so that we can all see that we are moving on a common agenda and a common path. I've found these elements to really be critical to my experience in the community engagement process as I've had my career. I'm going to kind of bring to a close. I think this is really key because I want to use this last piece that I've been involved in as really the example of how all these elements work together. And I've been involved. I'm a co-investigator with a Participatory study. Right now, I'm studying with a whole team. I got a team of researchers at University of South Carolina in Charleston. I've been looking at 10 middle schools there. At University of Maryland School of Psychiatry, I've got 10 middle schools in Baltimore. And over a 5-year period of time, we've gotten a grant to begin to look at mental health interventions and then measure them over the course of time from middle school until the 9th grade. And I'm going to a conference later this next month, April, to look at where we are. We're about halfway in that process. And so I've had the real experience of participating, of sharing and bringing my skill set to this process. Well, let me just talk about this African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative, because many of you on this call are aware of that work. In 2019, it was brought to my attention that diversity in precision medicine was being hampered by there only being one genomic data set upon which the genomic map was being created. And that genomic data set was of a European male. And as a result, one of the Johns Hopkins researchers I've come to know did a paper that identified that there were more than 300 million genes were missing, were omitted because of not having a more diverse genomic map. As I began to probe even deeper, I discovered that the Lieber Institute for Brain Development had a repository of over 4,000 brain samples, of which approximately 600, or more than 600, were persons of African ancestry. It is commonly understood that genetically all human species is 99.9% the same. I began to wonder. And as I began to understand that now we have in research, persons of African ancestry are underrepresented, I discovered that particularly in the area of neuroscience research, that you had some studies where there were 0 persons of African ancestry sampled and present. The problem this represents for me is that research outcomes that exclude diverse populations, the most diverse population on the planet, particularly when you talk about precision medicine as it evolves, that you can't omit persons of African ancestry. And if we're going to have medical therapies, medical treatments, medical protocols, by not having fully engaged persons of African ancestry, we will suffer and humanity will be at a loss. I immediately saw advocating for diversity and inclusion in neuroscience research and broadly in the neuroscience field as a social justice issue. That's what brought me to the process. I understand the protest model where we are faced with social justice and we stand out and we protest and we march and we bring media attention to an issue. But that tool wasn't needed in this instance. What was needed was an agreement on true community participatory model that valued community representation as an equal partner and collaborator. To me, this meant the African Ancestry Neuroscience Initiative must bring to the table not only a community perspective, but also funding resources. Addressing the first R of recognition was not a problem. Getting engaged, getting involved, my participation and that of others was recognized. It was respected. But as a representative of a community, I built a brand. People knew me. They knew my work in community engagement. They understood my work in community relationships. We could sit at the table as an equal partner with value add by participating and collaborating. But there is an issue that I think is very important, particularly coming from an African American or African ancestry perspective. And that is that we must always understand that respect is an earned value. To accomplish that goal, I felt it was necessary to raise funding that, but for community participation, would not be available. That was the value add. The community brings to the table values. And one of the values that I saw that we could bring to this process was that we could raise money. And I'm here to tell you that when you bring money to the research table, people listen. So more than $2.75 million to fund this effort. Got $275,000 from a local foundation, got $1.5 million from the state of Maryland, and we got $1 million from an African-American philanthropist. I found it important that we have an African-American philanthropist invest in this to validate the respect that the African-American community and the people of African ancestry brought to the process. A second objective that I had was that we accelerate the research on mapping persons of African ancestry to have a more complete genetic map. This process was a little bit more complex and required interacting with Congress and U.S. senators. Fortunately, I had a relationship with a Maryland U.S. senator who sat on the Senate's Appropriations Committee. I leveraged the relationship with a former U.S. senator who was the head of the Broadcast Association. He was one of the most powerful people in Washington, D.C. I went to him, I said, hey, I need your support, I need your help. His cousin his first cousin happened to be a U.S. senator on the Appropriations Committee as well, even though he was a Republican. So I had one Democratic colleague, and now I had a Republican colleague on the Appropriations Committee. And we began to work and we began to convince them that there should be funding in the federal budget that would allow for the acceleration of genetic mapping of people of African ancestries. While I was lobbying, and that's lobbying with a small L, while I was working this and my colleagues were working, what was going on was Dr. Francis Collins, who was the director of NIH, was surprised that there was a clergy leader out there advocating with US senators to obtain funding for advancing genetic mapping of persons of African ancestry, and say, wait a minute, what's going on? We was planning to do this. And what he did was he accelerated NIH's efforts in that area. We got a small victory because the victory that we received was that $31 million was added to the budget to fund the genomic mapping. And instead of our organization, African Ancestry Neuroscience Initiative, having to engage its resources to cause that to be done, NIH moved that process along. And now there are, as I understand, about 5 African ancestry genomic mapping processes going. I was going to be happy with 1, but I understand there are about 5 going on now. The next objective we addressed was to build out the pipeline for persons from diverse backgrounds to enter the field of neuroscience. We are blessed that in the midst of Baltimore, we have a national treasure, Morgan State University. We met with with your president and the senior staff and invited them to join the efforts of the African Ancestry Neuroscience Initiative. As fate would have it, Morgan State University was in the midst of establishing their strategic plan, and it included in their planning a Center for Brain Science. They also had a desire to become an R1 research institution. That was very prominent in their minds. I broached this question: how long would it take you to develop a $100 million laboratory? Of course, that is a monumental task. I then said, why don't we partner with LIBRA that has that facility and then use that facility to begin to build out our work collaboratively together? And that's what happened. LIBRA and Morgan State University, kind of ushered in by the African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative, developed a mutual a memorandum of understanding. And then I believe, from my perspective, Henri became real. We developed a partnership with Morgan that has, I believe, launched a graduate master's degree program in neuroscience. We have professors from LIBRA have joint privileges now at Morgan, and I believe even vice versa. We've developed an internship program, and the first intern, who was a graduate intern for Morgan, has gone on to be accepted, I learned this week, in Johns Hopkins PhD program in cellular and molecular medicine. We developed a relationship with a former Meyerhoff scholar who's a doctor at Duke University. And we was able to hire one of his mentees who graduated recently with her PhD, and she's now on the staff of LIBRA. And so this reality of building this pipeline is coming true, and we're seeing it in real time. But there was one thing that we jointly were able to do, Morgan, Lieber, African Ancestry Neuroscience Research, which was monumental. We were able to attract the attention of Chan Zuckerberg Foundation. And CGI has given to our work $1 million grant to scale the African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative. So when I look at this community participatory modeling process, I recognize that it's important that we always understand what I call these 4 R's: recognition, respect, relationship, resiliency. And then I also recognize that we must understand the barriers that may, in fact, inhibit true community participation. But I've also learned that you have to celebrate real accomplishments and results. Because as we make as a goal to change practices, policies, and procedures, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens by diligent, intentional work and effort. And when the community is engaged, when the community understands that we're on a common mission to make real change that's going to benefit not only themselves, but future generations, I believe you get a commitment and a skill set that is very invaluable, and one that I think is a value add in all the work that we do. I just want to conclude by saying this, that because of this work, I've been invited by CGI to not only am I going to have the opportunity to speak at your conference, but I'm also going to speak at a national conference of CGI in the coming months, where we're going to begin to outline in more broader terms and more specific terms this community-based participatory model. They like it, they want to scale it, and I believe that it can be a value add in the field of research. And I believe we can change the trajectory of diverse communities that really want to be involved. Community participatory research that understands the value of resiliency and community participants is the transformative model that will revolutionize research in the future and ensure that precision medicine is available to all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. That was wonderful. Open the floor to just speak up if you have questions. Just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, or put up your hand if you want. Any questions? I'm wondering, as people start off, what's been, you talked about barriers. What's been the biggest barrier for you so far that you had to overcome, or you're still trying to overcome?
I think one of the biggest barriers is that for community people, they have so much pressure on them just for everyday life, and to take on a responsibility that might involve time. It's sometimes difficult to allocate time to that process. So I think one of the things that I have come to understand is that important in our research model, that we recognize that there should be compensation, there should be assistance for those community participants so that they're able to devote the time to it that you need over the long period to be able to fully engage. So it's we think in terms of gift cards, but I think that we should create broader stipends, more significant funding that allows for them to be fully engaged and not have to make a choice between, do I feed myself, do I buy eggs, do I take care of childcare, or do I participate in this research that might unlock some future value? That's been one of the biggest barriers that I've seen.
Thank you. Christine?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Hathaway. The
Hello.
example that you gave, which, I'm of course involved in, of Henry, is in many ways a little bit of an unusual example of this connection, because it happened on the very highest level. And as you pointed out, it came from the community into the highest level of biomedical research administration. Now, more often than not, the interactions are going to be, as you were saying, individuals who live in the community and economically maybe not that well off in order to donate their time. And it involves, your average faculty member or graduate student, from an academic institution. So what kind of training models, specific training plans have you come across that help create this communication? Because there are all these things that you mentioned, it was amazing for me to hear, this model and all the different terminologies, but the learning that's involved.
Yes.
All sides how to structure it.
I can give you a specific example of that, because it occurred during COVID. One of the challenges during COVID, when in the early stages of COVID, was that at that time Governor Hogan wanted to have an effective response to COVID that got to people in communities that were outside of the direct medical institutions. And so his staff came to me. I brought together a group of colleagues, and I said to them, just seemed very obvious now because it was done, but it was novel at that time. Why don't we use faith-based institutions as COVID centers and sites? Now, that required, one, a training experience for the faith-based leaders, because they did not think of their faith-based institution in that manner, that it could be a part of the medical delivery system. And so we selected 6 sites around the city, 6 influential clergy leaders, and we trained them in the process, and we began to have them understand the process. We also recognized that in that process, there was a cost to use the facility. So there was lighting, there was heating, there was all of these things. And if you think COVID also was a really restricted time in terms of funding. So we made certain that we're able to cover those costs so that it wasn't a burden on the faith-based institution as it was providing the service. The next thing that we had to do, which was very key, was that we had to create within each of those institutions facilitators, persons who were in the process that would facilitate the COVID vaccine. Now, we had the pharmaceutical professionals that would come in and administer it, but you needed the people who would actually organize the site. Now, that became more of an organizing effort where we went into each of these faith-based institutions and we organized teams there to be a part of that delivery service. 1, to enroll people in, 2, to follow up with calls, 3, to make sure that they were got numbers and came in line, make sure that they were able to sit and be watched during the time that needed to, for those 15 minutes, they need to be watched, and then maybe make certain that they were able to get home safely. What happened was that inside of each of these faith-based institutions, there was a collegiality that was developed. There was a response that was developed. But in this instance, what I found significant was that their use of time was very specific. We needed you at this particular time, at this particular place to perform this particular service. And the result, they were able to allocate it because they saw value, 1, in providing services to their members and to their community, but also they understood the significance of it as related to their own families. So the area of mutual self-interest was identified, and therefore, as a result, we got that contribution. I think I did another project, and this was a mental health project coming after Columbine. After Columbine, as you know, there was a lot of concern around mental health in schools. And so University of Maryland, Baltimore became one of the NIH sites for mental health. And they involved me in the process. And I said, well, we've got to engage the families to make them understand the significance of mental health and how they can play a role in this. There, we had to do a deep analysis of the needs of the families. And what we found was childcare, which we all know. I mean, I can't participate in something when who's going to watch my child? So we had to build out a robust system of childcare while they was participating. The other thing we did was that we knew that every family is challenged with food. So we went and brought in a food co-op, and everybody got a whole food that could serve them literally for the month. And then we made certain that there was a stipend that they received so that their time was valued, that they participated in this. And I just say to you, Sister Christine, that every situation is different. But what I've found is that when you value and understand the community participant and understand their needs, but respect value, I believe you can design ways that they can come to the table and participate where it's not a loss for them. It's not, I'm losing because I'm giving up something, or my family is suffering because I'm giving up something. No, you are adding something. And as you add your skill set, add your being a trusted source, as you add your intellectual capital, you allow us to understand whatever the particular research problem is better. And your participation helps us achieve the goal.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Well, then I just immediately give everybody an A if you don't get any questions. Everybody.
I do have one question, or just to clarify. When you mentioned language, right? What, if any, difference is language from health literacy? Because I think, health literacy sounds like such a much larger barrier, whereas, language, when you're talking about the town versus the gown, how do you compare that when you look at the historical perspective of that mistrust that comes probably from communication?
Yeah, my grandmother would say, you got sugar, right? You would say you got diabetes. And so I think it is just understanding that we have language that seeks to identify similar things, and it becomes incumbent upon us to understand how people use their language patterns to describe that which we already know. And it is health literacy. It is how do we understand the community participants' language patterns, language descriptions, so that we can merge them with the terminology that we use in research or in medical literature and language. And that's really that early getting to know process where you do that. And it's not, I wish there was a magic wand, but it's really what I just said about my grandmother. Hey, you got sugar.
Right.
But we know that it's diabetes, and diabetes is a little bit more complex than just your body, your blood level, sugar level being either high or low.
High or low, yeah. Thank you. That's true.
Well, I also have a question. Dr. Hathaway, I'm really always impressed with everything that you have done, and your presentation was very insightful. I just want to follow up on what you said about the importance of starting small and organized, which is really important, and celebrate success so that you gradually build a large and organized network. Now, as someone that I kind of have followed that pathway in my career, so what are some of your lessons learned and specific examples of when the network become large and you want to keep it organized, and you would like to make everyone productive, synergized, rather than becoming disorganized and people working silo? Okay.
One of the things that happens when you talk about persons, researchers, academicians as yourself, much of what I described, you've gone through. I mean, you've experienced resiliency yourself. You've experienced all of those qualities that I identified. But one of the things that you have been able to accomplish that sometimes we don't realize is that you're able to do big things. It's a big thing to earn a PhD. It's a big thing to successfully exercise and execute a grant. It's a big thing. And so what happens is that you have in your experience big things, and you know that there are steps to get to the success of being able to accomplish a big thing. That's not the experience of most community persons. most community persons have too much defeat as their experience.
Mhm.
It doesn't work. I tried that. I couldn't do it. My patience is not there. I'm not able to focus. I'm hyperactive, and so I can't sit for long. So they're faced with a different set of circumstances where they've not had successes as we would quantify success. And so I think it becomes important for us to recognize that small things, and I'm gonna tell you something very small. Our meeting starts on time, and for the past 5 meetings, you have been on time. Something as simple as that affirms that your participation is important and you celebrate it. I think when you say, hey, I need to have an evaluation of our meeting, and someone fills out the evaluation, and there may have been a series of evaluations that's been filled out, and you then celebrate. Ms. Johnson, for the past 5 evaluations, has successfully completed the evaluation sheet. I mean, those are really small things, but they are big things. And what they do is that they build a sense of confidence in a participant that, wait a minute, if I stay with this, if I do this, I can be able to accomplish the big thing that for many of us is normative. You know, we know that over a matter of time, we're going to make some change. You know what I mean? Either we're going to change it or it's going to change us. but for a person who experiences defeat too often, I think it's important that we understand celebration and affirmation as a part of the community participation process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? And Reverend Hathaway is so convincing. He took me to Liba Institute to see, and it's like, I'm a cancer researcher, but now I have a neuroscience student.
Yeah.
So that's how convincing you were.
Yeah. No, and here's the beauty that I found. Why do we create institutional barriers when institutions are made up of people? And so what I've learned in my experience is that if you get to know people, then the 4 R's kick in. Do they recognize me? Do I recognize them? Do we have respect? Do we have relationship? Do we have the ability to have the resiliency to overcome situations? And I found that to be a pattern that has been if I have a secret sauce, that has been the secret sauce in the work that I've done thus far. So here you have now Libra with its doors fully open to you and to others to come in, and in fact, we're even going for, we're looking to get a very highly sensitive and a very expensive piece of equipment that will allow for Morgan to have full accessibility to this multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. And I think that collaboratively together, we can build what I call the beloved community, where all of our interests are achieved and all of our goals are also achieved as well. And so I'm just very proud. I want to thank each and every one of you. You become colleagues and friends of mine. Morgan is truly a national treasure, and truly the gifts and skills that you bring is going to just improve the quality of life for residents of not only of our city, but of our country and the world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the one thing that also stood out to me was when you said we train each other. And I think that's really important, because what we're really touting at Morgan is that we're unique in that we're trying to blend basic scientists like myself with behavioral, clinical.
Exactly.
And so the learning is important. And I'm trying to bring more faculty to learn the other side, like people like me who never did CBPR. I didn't even know what it is, but I've come to learn what it is and appreciate it. We can't learn if we're not here to listen to these things and to open our minds. Because as a basic scientist, I can tell you, when we were writing the UO1 application,
Sure.
I wanted to write quickly, but people like Payam and all wanted to discuss things. So we as a basic scientist, we had to learn to relax and listen.
That's right.
And it was a really good lesson for us.
I think, I mean, I'm so excited about what we're doing together. The world is watching. It is not by coincidence that you're starting to get national and international foundations looking at the work that we're doing. Either singularly in terms of Morgan, or singularly in terms of Lieber, or singularly in terms of African ancestry neuroscience research, but collectively what we're doing. And I think that there's going to be a reservoir of resources that's going to be available to us as we collaboratively continue on this path.
Thank you. And Asifua, you have a question or comment? Go ahead.
Yes, hi, Dr. Hathaway. I'm so proud of the work that you do. But I did have a question about, you were saying that sometimes people feel disillusioned by the things that they have done, and they don't really see them as major things that they've accomplished in their life. So if these people feel defeated, how do you then restructure a person's thinking to see the benefits of their engagement into the community in the very present moment?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think, as I said before, you celebrate the small wins.
Mm-hmm.
You celebrate just something simple, like I said before, that you attended 5 meetings on time, and there's a reward for that. There's something that we celebrate, that we applaud that. I think one of the things that happened, if you think about it, people like to be affirmed. And I think many instances, we don't affirm people because we take them for granted. And I think that in the community participatory process, we have to realize that everyone is important. Everyone is significant. Everyone adds value to the process. So as a result, when a person comes in, they had a tough day. Man, it's been tough. I've made it to this meeting. Well, you have to respect the fact that they made it to the meeting, and maybe somebody has to take them over for a one-on-one and have a conversation with them so that they begin to feel as though, wait a minute, I'm investing my time in something good. And so relationships, and I talk about relationships in my 4 R's, relationships become important, because when you develop a real relationship, then I believe you begin to develop resiliency, so that when you face obstacles collectively together, you're able to overcome them. And I think that's the important thing. And again, I mean, I was really try to be quite clear on resiliency. Resiliency comes about because a person has an extended family network. Now, that doesn't mean they're biological. That means that they are shared mutual interests. So as a person realizes that, hey, I'm a part of a network that's supporting my interests, that's what I call extended family network. Then when I talk about continuous learning, when a person has community-based learning and they come to a situation and they find that they're being fed intellectually and mentally, then they want more of that. And then I think I said it in a way of, I believe I'm a faith person. I believe that there's a divine hand that's leading us all, and I believe that we also have to rely on that there is a faith experience that we all share, and an embedded theology that say that there's something greater than I, and as I connect with others, I am mutually benefited by being in that kind of relationship.
Thank you.
Good to see you, my son. I celebrate you with your master's degree. You're an intellectual academic, you know.
Yeah. So thank you. We look forward to seeing all of you, and we'll meet in person when we have the conference in April. We're looking forward to that. And
I'm looking forward as well.
Yes. Okay. So at this point, I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you so much for giving us inspiring words of wisdom, and it actually will help me, because as we get ready to start this other grant, it's like I can see things I'll have to work on. So thank you for that.
Well, we're going to be working together. That's going to be great.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming today as well. And we look forward to meeting again next week. We have it weekly. We switch it around. Sometimes it's community, sometimes it's scientists, just so we learn from each other.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Nair.